This is our another lecture series on comparative world literature. Literatures are expanding, they're expanding, it's expanding its vision, its parameters and paradigms, and it's imbibing all other aspects. So, we are discussing on these things for a couple of days, for 2 to 3 months, we are discussing on this. So, today we are in another phase, and I warmly express my regards and my thanks to our honorable VC madam, Nandini ma'am, for organizing this whole lecture series on comparative world literature. And we are also following with this in our journal. Journal is to be published by Hindi University, and ma'am has tried to allotted task to chief editors and other editors to compile all these lectures in that journal. And so we are moving on with this. So a big thanks to her, and she is really very energetic to organize such good series of lectures. So we are welcoming Sanjukta ma'am, and I'm just giving a brief bio note of her. And Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, professor and former head, Department of English, former dean, Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University. She has been the recipient of the Fulbright Postdoctoral Fellowship, University of North Carolina, and Fulbright Scholar in Residence, State University of New York, Oceago, Australia India Council Fellowship, Gender Studies Fellowship, University of British Columbia, Translator Fellowship, University of East Anglia, Norwich, among others. Apart from invitations to participate in national, international seminars and conferences, Dasgupta has taught and lectured at universities in the USA, UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia. She served as a jury member and chairperson of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, United Kingdom. She was a convener of the English Language Board of Sahitya Academy, Minister of Culture, as well as a member of Sahitya Academy's General Council. She is currently a member of the Advisory Committee of the Gyanpith Award. In 2018, she taught in Poland as visiting professor at I'm sorry for the pronunciation, Poland. She is the honorary visiting professor of the Department of English, Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata, and the chairperson of the advisory board at the Center of Excellence in Literature, Language, and Communication of the University of Engineering and Management, Kolkata. She is the president of the executive committee of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, Kolkata. She received the IWSFF Women Achievers Award in 2019 and WEI Kamala Das Poetry Award in 2020, the Ethos Literary Award in 2022, Muktadhara Jego Shamman 2024. She was conferred the Governor School of Honor in 2024 and the CLRC National Lifetime Achievement Award 2024. In October 2024, she delivered 2 lectures on Tagore's writings at St. John's College, Oxford University, and the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, Oxford University. She is a poet, short story writer, critic, and translator, and her 27 published books are the novels of Huxley and Hemingway, a study in 2 planes of reality, responses, selected
Priyanka,
aces.
do you have to read that list? I don't think.
It's okay, ma'am.
Yes.
um, so there are so many compositions she has contributed to the world of poetry, to the world of writings, to the world of prose. So she is a managing editor of Families, a journal of representations, 2000 to 2012. Thank you so much, man, for giving us some time, and we will surely be enriched with your lecture. Thank you so much.
Priyanka, probably you can introduce Professor Pema as well, then we start.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
just a minute. Just a minute. Pema ma'am is a professor of English with more than 25 years of experience and working in the ODL system of one of the mega universities in the world, and she possesses a PhD in literature and cultural studies, and she has worked with an intergovernmental organization in the capacity of program officer education, dealing with both open schooling as well as open universities in the Commonwealth Asian region and particularly in India, as well as she is a senior advisor, open distance, online and e-learning, and is equipped with impeccable written and verbal communication skills, as well as she has got an excellent interpersonal skills with work experience in a multicultural and linguistic environment. She's keenly interested in the use of ICT in the humanities and is a well-known advocate of open and distance and digital learning. She has been a resource person at many FIPs, FDPs, both on literature and ODDL, and keynote speaker at several seminars and conferences, both national and international. We really welcome you, Pema ma'am, and we are really thankful to you for giving us some time, and we will really be enriched with your thought-provoked presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am, for
Thank
giving
you.
us some time.
Thank you, Priyanka.
Over to Sanjukta ma'am, and she'll be delivering
Yeah.
first.
So before they start, maybe I can just
Okay,
talk a little bit about both of them. Yeah.
sure.
Okay. So I'm so glad to have Professor Sanjukta and Professor Pema together in front of me on the screen. First of all, we apologize for this miscommunication. Somehow, the poster said 1:30 and the link which they shared with me said, I mean 10:30, and then the link said 10. So somehow it was a miscommunication. But I'm glad that both of you could join to accommodate me to attend my function at 12:30 today. Thanks once again to Sanjukta Di and also to dear Pema. About Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, I mean, the whole country knows her. Who doesn't know her? She is an eminent poet and a creative writer, a critic, and she has so many, so many things to talk about her, which Priyanka has already introduced. About my association with Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, I know her since 2 decades now. I always knew her through social media, and then I was doing PhD in Shantiniketan at that time. I had heard about her. I had seen her work. I have been reading her work. I refer her books to my scholars and my students. And I'm especially very fond of her book Sita's Sisters, because my book is Sita. So somehow I have this solidarity and sisterhood with her. And we met for the first time last month in Kolkata. And then the way we met, no one will say that we were meeting physically for the first time. We were meeting for the first time as if we were meeting every single day of our lives. She's that kind of a warm person. She promotes youngsters. When I was very young, she used to, write very nice things about me here and there. And then once she invited me to Sahitya Academy as well. She had never seen me, but she invited me. And she believes in empowering people, in empowering women, in empowering, the needy, the marginalized, the subaltern. She is truly a socially committed writer. She is not just juggling with words. She is a committed writer who is contributing to the society through literature, which is her social mobility platform. So, Professor Sanjukta, I have so much to say about you, but then I think your lecture will speak for you for itself. So I will leave it to you to deliver your lecture for 30 minutes. Please don't curtail on your time. I will wait. I can go at 12:30. So I have so much to talk about Professor Sanjukta. Now, coming to Professor Pema, uh, we grew up together. We started in IGNO almost together. She had joined IGNO a few years before me. So when I came to IGNO in 2006, she was the first teacher in the university, the first person in the university who made me feel at home. She welcomed me to IGNO as a faculty in the department. She introduced me to all kinds of courses in the department. To me, Pema is synonymous with IGNO. And this is no exaggeration. She is a very committed and a very hardworking person. She knows almost everything about all the courses offered in IGNO. So whenever you have a doubt or any technical issue or any logistical issue, she is my go-to person. I go to her, I discuss my issues. When I propose a program, I propose a course, I discuss my concept notes with her. And she is very well informed. And she is a totally no nonsense person. She will never talk things that are not required. And she is very logical, very rational, and a very strong woman, a very strong and an independent woman. I have learned so much from Pema. Now, about her work. She has designed many courses for Indira Gandhi National Open University for the Department of English and also from many other departments. She has worked with Commonwealth of Learning, with SIMCA, and she doesn't talk about her work, and neither she allows people to talk about her work. But then she has been working silently, and I'm sure that she is doing some civilizational work. I'm very glad that as the Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, I got an opportunity to invite my dear friend, Professor Pema, to deliver a lecture for the Hindi University. And I'm equally glad that I could unite the two of you, though virtually. In near future, probably by mid 2025 or towards Puja 2025, we will have a face-to-face seminar or an international conference or something in India University, where I will get a chance to unite all of you face-to-face as well. Now, coming to the Hindi University Special Lectures Series, I have already given a brief introduction about it in the other YouTube lectures which you might have seen. But well, let me put it on record here that I joined Hindi University as the Vice Chancellor on the 20th of December, after which I had multiple meetings with faculty and students and the scholars, and I got to know that they have a lot of potential. We need to channelize those. We need to do some creative, some productive, some extracurricular work, which is also very academic and helpful to the syllabus design of Hindi University. I am trained by IGNOU, so when we IGNOU people talk, Professor Pema will agree with me. When IGNOU people talk, they start talking about a course or a program. We all the time we talk about programs and courses and students and support services. We are trained like that. We can see something from a distance and we know what we have to do. Though IGNOU is a distance education university, but we are actually a dual mode university. We have distance education and online education as well. Also, our MPhil and PhD programs are launched, on the face-to-face mode. We have classes every single day with our students. And in Hindi University, I thought that since we are a language university, so we can introduce a lot of languages. For that, my modus operandi was introduce a comparative world literatures department. Through the comparative world literature department, we are trying to launch at least 30 MA courses, out of which 22 will be on the 22 Indian languages, the official languages approved by the Parliament of India, by the Constitution. Rest other 8 MA courses can be on folk literature, on tribal literature, and some foreign languages. Like I was the director of the Department of Foreign Languages, so I have some exposure to foreign languages as well. So we will propose 30 MA courses under that comparative world literature departments. And this lecture series, which we have introduced in January, this is only the second month, and already both of you are 12th and 13th speakers. We invite the best brains of the country to contribute to our lecture series, and undoubtedly, both of you are two of the best brains in the country. And I'm sure that today your lectures will be extremely beneficial for the faculty and the students. We are recording, we will have a YouTube. And yes, when we design the syllabus of the 30 MA programs that I am talking about, we will get back to you for your help, your support, for your suggestions, recommendation of texts, and for syllabus design. And I'm very, very confident that we are going in the right way. Please keep giving us directions, and please guide our students and faculty. With this, I invite both of you once again, and I'm very happy that we are going to have a lecture series by 2 lectures by both of you. Please take 30 minutes each. Don't cut it. Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, Madam, my friend Nandini Sahu. I am absolutely overwhelmed by this very generous introduction, and also Priyanka's preliminary introduction. And I'm so happy that you have extended this invitation to me for, as we said, that we are not merely, and you mentioned this specifically, that we are not merely acquaintances, but we are absolute, let us use the American expression, buddies. So yes, and Sita is our bonding link, I think. And I'm very happy to be here today. and also to be part of this extremely relevant and extremely necessary course that you have introduced. Because without comparative literature and without comparative world literature, we cannot any longer live in isolation. We need to be inclusive. And where else can we be more readily inclusive without any barriers or borders except in literature? Because literature is a field of study which, as its precondition, has the word empathy in it. And without empathy, I think literary study is just not possible. It is the precondition, the first requirement, and that is why literature is part of the humanities. Now, when I received the concept note that Priyanka had forwarded to me, I felt that there was some emphasis on ecology and also the environment. So I thought for today's about 30 minutes on which I have been asked to speak, I will try to cite literary uh, references from which, strangely, though we talk about environmental hazards and climate crisis and climate change, and it seems as if all this is happening recently, however, literary texts have recorded, spoken about, and even warned about the human world encroaching on the non-human world, on the natural environment, and being so ruthlessly destructive towards the ecological balance that has been able to keep the world together and us together. So, on keeping that in mind, I would just like to begin in terms of not just talking about literary representations, but I'm trying to sort of not merely compare literary representations about the environment in various parts of the world, but also about the real world and the contemporary world and what is happening now. So it is about the real, the imagined, the philosophic, the empirical, and the epistemic. So let us see whether we can go on this journey together. Recently, on the 22nd of February, the 44-kilometer long tunnel, the world's longest irrigation tunnel, behind the Sri Sailam Dam in Nagar, Kurnool, collapsed on Saturday morning when some 8 persons, 4 workers and 4 engineers were inside repairing a leak. This is situated, as you know, in Telangana, and it has been in the news for quite a few days. Rescue teams are of the view that chances of survival of the 8 persons was bleak, and till date we do not know whether they have survived. Let's focus back to another date. On 12th November 2023, a section of the Silkyara Bend Barkot Tunnel planned to connect National Highway 134 in the Uttarkashi district of Uttarakhand, India, caved in while under construction. The collapse occurred at around 5:30 in the evening and trapped 41 workers inside the tunnel. Let us go for a bit of generalization. According to official data, More than 1,000 landslides have hit Uttarakhand, killing more than 48 people in 2023. Much of it has been attributed to excessive monsoon rains. Earlier this year, cracks developed in hundreds of homes and many streets in Joshimath, a small town in the state of Uttarakhand. Research indicates that the topsoil in the Himalayas is eroding at 3 times the national average, leading to the depletion of the region's carbon sink. In 2013, the town of Kedarnath was hit by devastating floods, triggered by heavy monsoon rains, in which thousands of people were swept away. Perhaps some of you have even watched the film Kedarnath, which was a very powerful film. Environmentalists and residents have blamed rapid construction for land subsidence in the region, saying that this contributed to the tunnel collapse. The Uttarakhand region, the birthplace of the Ganga and its major tributaries, sustains more than 600 million Indians, men, women, and children, with water and food. The landscape is dotted with forests, glaciers, and water springs. Women, as homemakers and caregivers, are the worst hit, as they have to procure food, cook, collect water, and look after family members, both minor children and senior members. Now, with all that factual data, this is the era of data, as our ICT person, Prema, if she's listening, knows this very well. So now I will move a little away from data and beyond algorithms and cite my own, a brief excerpt from my own poem, which is titled The Curse of Joshimath. And now the curse of Joshimath, in serpentine gyrations, has crept into Kulu, Manali, Kinnar, the Himalayan resorts, flooded, fractured, spine-chilling landslides. Marooned they cry out as nature rages and fumes. Slowly but steadily at Joshimath, the ground beneath the feet sinks in silence, stealthily caving in, cruel cracks like bleeding wounds on floors and walls, till not to look is safer than looking. So this is my very humble way of trying to sensitize readers who would about what is happening to the ecological balance. And if this is about 2025, let us turn to a play written in colonial India by Rabindranath Tagore. Way back, yes? When Tagore first drafted the Bengali original of The Waterfall or Muktadhara, he had titled the play as Path, the path, and on further reflection, he even experimented with the title Pathomochon. In translation, it may be read as Off the Beaten Track or A New Path Forward. As a matter of fact, Tagore felt convinced that this new play of his, which was finally titled Muktadhara, the free waterfall, would receive recognition in Europe as a pertinent contemporary topic about the threats to silent nature and poor people unleashed by the Industrial Revolution. However, the desired impact was not created, though Tagore repeatedly stressed that the play should not be received as a symbolic play, but as a play that raised issues of concern about rapid industrialization, the plight of the poor people whose source of living and sustenance was being destroyed, criticizing the diabolic domination of technology that was destroying the environment and displacing the people with ruthless callousness. It is necessary, therefore, to understand Tagore's purpose regarding the content of the play. In his English introduction to the play, published in the Modern Review in 1922, more than 100 years ago, along with the complete translated version, Tagore wrote, and I quote, "The waterfall around which the action of the play revolves is named Muktadhara, the free current. The name free current is sure to give rise in the reader's minds to the suspicion that it has a symbolic meaning, that it represents all that the word freedom signifies in human life. This interpretation will appear to be still more obvious when it is seen that the machine referred to in the play has stopped the flow of water. Poets, which implies creative writers and artists throughout the world, are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, as the radical romantic English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley had asserted in his defense of poetry. I will come back again to the present because comparative literature is one where we cannot isolate ourselves to one historic period, one particular century, but need to make these networks of communication between literary tradition and contemporary literature. So here is a poem published, I think, in 2005 by the British African poet John Agard, which is titled Inheritance. This poem has been published recently in a climate change poetry anthology. Here, John Agard writes in this poem, I am quoting, "If we, the children of the meek, should inherit an earth whose rainforest lungs breathe a tale of waste, an earth where the ailing sea shudders in its own slick, if we, the children of the meek, should inherit an earth where the grass goes nostalgic at the mere mention of green, and the sky looks out of its depth when reminded of blue. If we, the children of the meek, should inherit such an earth, then we ask of the future one question. Should we dance or break into gnashing of teeth at the news of our inheritance?" Unquote. You notice that John Agard is not at all happy with the way the world is devastating the environment in such a ruthless way. This poem clearly validates the claim that creative writers, poets, fictionists, dramatists, filmmakers, and artists play the roles of soothsayers, fortune tellers, visionaries who issue cautionary advice and caveats whenever there is a crisis that affects the whole world. This need for writers and literators of playing a responsible role has been reiterated by many internationally acclaimed climate crisis commentators and thinkers. Here lies the most intricate task assigned to writers who must concretize this global crisis and raise awareness on a large scale. Amitav Ghosh, as we all know, stressed that the role of writers is essential to the management of environmental hazards, in the sense that, quote, when future generations look back upon the great derangement, they will certainly blame the leaders and politicians of this time for their failure to address the climate crisis. But they may well hold artists and writers to be equally culpable, for the imagining of possibilities is not, after all, the job of politicians and bureaucrats. He, of course, very directly blames artists and writers if they choose to look away from the threat that has enveloped in real terms the entire world by upsetting the ecological balance through inhuman activities performed by the human race. You will know about the devastation of the rainforests in South America. And that has also led to so much of political wrangling in the United Nations. But the rainforests, most of the trees, rain trees, have gone because the forests had to be opened up for cultivation and grazing grounds of animals so that multinational companies could make their factories for exporting various food products from these areas. Now let us turn to a very young person, a climate activist. And as you know her, and she is located in Sweden. Her name is Greta Thunberg. And when she was 15 years old, now she is a young adult. But at the age of 15, in the year 2019, she wrote to the United Nations unequivocally. This is the voice of a very young girl who is in despair and indignation. She writes to the United Nations. You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I am one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? That was in 2019 when she was 15. I think she's around 21 now. So, interestingly, more than 100 years before Tagore, through his plays Rakta Karabi and Muktadhara, was warning the world about ruthless industrialization, which is now renamed as development in the eerie era of globalization. More than 100 years before that, the romantic poet Lord Byron had written a poem titled Darkness in 1816 that has been associated with a sense of climate despair, apocalyptic dread, and human helplessness. I would like to read a section of that poem. So, Darkness by Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron. A romantic poet, very dashing, very handsome, at one time quite the rock star of the British intelligentsia. Here is what he writes. The world was void. The populous and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, a lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. The rivers Lakes and ocean all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths. Ships sailorless lay rotting on the sea, and their masts fell down piecemeal. As they dropped, they slept on the abyss without a surge. The waves were dead, the tides were in their grave. The moon, their mistress, had expired before. The winds were withered in the stagnant air, and the clouds perished. Darkness had no need of aid from them. Darkness was the universe. The poem is at least partly influenced by the mass hysteria of the time brought about by an Italian astronomer's prediction that the sun would burn itself out on July 18th of that year, 1816. And what about T.S. Eliot coming to the 20th century? This poem, which all of us know and all of us had to teach also in classrooms, those of us who are teachers present here. And it is, of course, Eliot's The Wasteland, published in 1922. And Eliot writes, "What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images, where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water." So, in this Anthropocene epoch, the environment has emerged red in tooth and claws. But the irony lies in the fact that the responsibility for the hazardous environment cannot be attributed to the vagaries of nature and God's wrath. Not an act of God. God has better work to do. But the act of man has unleashed this indiscriminate ravaging of the planet. The chemical, biological, physical, and psychological hazards unleashed by patriarchy, capitalist patriarchy, and financial capitalism have put to risk the lives of humans and non-humans throughout the world. But specifically, the hazards affect the lives and livelihoods of all those who are located in the global south. I think I am almost close to the time allotted to me. And here, of course, women's vulnerability to climate change stems also from a number of factors, which are social, economic, and cultural. And these are representations that we notice, say, for example, the ecofeminist Vandana Shiva argues that women's close intimacy with the environment is internalized as an indivisible member of a collective family of humans, non-humans, including nature, prakriti, that includes forests, rivers, mountains, the sky, stars, and planets. So Vandana Shiva states, I quote, "Indian women have been in the forefront of ecological struggles to conserve forests, land, and water. They have challenged the Western concept of nature as an object of exploitation and have protected it as Prakriti, the living force that supports life." Indian women's immersive response to nature, Prakriti, can be traced back to the Vedic times and the epics, Ramayana, Mahabharata, as Sita, Surpanakha, Shaubari, Draupadi, Shakuntala, among many others, spend a period of their lives as dwellers of forests. I wish to conclude here, as I am close to those 30 minutes allotted to me by referring back to Amitav Ghosh and his brilliant documentary fiction, The Nutmeg's Curse, Parables for a Planet in Crisis. And Amitav Ghosh writes about his book. As I see it, the idea that the earth is an inert repository of resources that exists primarily to be exploited by some humans had its origins in the apocalyptic violence that was unleashed by Europeans against their human others in the Americas and Africa. It is no accident that climate denialism is strongest in the settler colonial countries of the Anglosphere. The denialists are disavowing their responsibility for the worldwide environmental changes of today in much the same way that their ancestors did, as Sudeep Sen also emphasized in his poems and his trilogy on the Anthropocene. I therefore wish to conclude this just a very preliminary remarks about what we are experiencing every day of our lives by stating that experts may wrangle about which should be the more appropriate signifier regarding environmental hazards in the 21st century escalated by demonic development. Should it be Holocene or Anthropocene? Should we debate about terraformations, technology reversing climate crisis, neutralizing the risk factors? Creative writers can go nitpicking about the discursive problematics of fantasy novels, science fiction, and climate fiction. Poetry, however, plays a more transcendent role, as it did from the time of the epics and the oral traditions, as the enduring earth wonders when we shall truly wake up. Cleanse the earth of all borders and boundaries, hegemony, new imperialism, violence, weaponizing, profit and power politics, and overcome all such selfish collective narcissism and gluttonous greed someday, very soon. It is the responsibility of literary texts throughout the world to register, record, and warn the world about the dangers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam, for such a wonderful talk.
Thank
Now,
you, Priyanka.
Honorable VC, Madam will deliver a presidential talk on this topic.
Okay.
Over to Madam.
Okay.
Well, Priyanka, this is not a presidential talk per se. After Professor Sanjukta has spoken, there is hardly anything left to talk. But anyway, please allow me to give a couple of remarks on what she talked about. I was continuously taking down notes when she was
Oh.
speaking, and no other person could have spoken on this topic any better than what Professor Sanjukta has done. She started by talking about inclusivity and empathy in literature. Yes, certainly, that is universal literature where there is inclusivity and there is empathy. Then ecology and environment were her topics, and then the empirical, the epistemic, and then she talked about important issues like excessive monsoon rains and landslides and floods, and then how ecological balance can be sensitized through literature. And then when she mentioned about Tagore's texts like Muktadhara and Rabda Karavi, being a serious Tagorean myself, I could so relate to those. Thank you so much for talking about those. And then, yes, poets, the writers, I would say they are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, as you rightly pointed out. And then you quoted quite a few British African poets, and then poems on climate change. We are going to do some more research on those. and probably use them as a part of our syllabus. And then women's vulnerability to climate change that leads to theorization. The discourse of ecofeminism is something very pertinent. I would talk to the faculty members of the university to do more serious work on ecofeminism, because that is the need of the hour, Professor Sanjukta. And then also you mentioned about epics and oral traditions, and you concluded about the critical collective narcissism and how literature can problematize these things. So out of your lecture, I have taken a few points myself, which I would be using as our, part of our syllabus. The first one should be anthropocentrism versus ecocentrism in literary canons. That you quoted some contemporary poets, and then you talked about those, about the indigenous and post-humanist perspectives in their writing. And then another issue that I have taken up from your lecture was colonialism and ecological exploitation in literary history. How many literary traditions are entwined with the colonial histories, and then they have talked about environmental destruction. And comparative literatures, they must critique such texts that romanticize expansion while uplifting counter narratives from colonized regions that foreground environmental justice. And there is no better place than India for that. We being such a multicultural land, probably our literature will serve the purpose. I have taken that from you. And then another issue that you have taken up, which is very, very pertinent today, is Eurocentric environmental ethics and literary discourses. We have to challenge those. Western ecological thoughts, rooted in romanticism and transcendentalism, they dominate the syllabus, the syllabi of Indian universities. Now come to our kind of universities, come to IGNOU, come to Hindi University. There are many such universities. The literature departments must incorporate non-Western ecological philosophies, such as deep ecological traditions in Indian, African, East Asian literatures. I'm sure Professor Pema will agree with me that in School of Humanities in the English department, and also in many other schools in the university, we take special care to design such syllabus which are not just Eurocentric. Rather, we try to make those very flexible and inclusive. And today you have emphasized that, and there is so much to learn from your lecture. And then somewhere you talked about the politics of translation and ecological knowledge systems. Translation is very, very important. Just now I was talking about the 30 MA courses that we are going to launch. Translation will play a very vital role there. Somebody from West Bengal to read English literature or Hindi literature should be hugely dependent on translation, and that is where translation plays a very important role. And we have a department of translation studies already in our university, and the faculty and the students are doing well. They are well placed. And then also you talked about folklore, mythology, and environmental consciousness in comparative literary studies. I was very fascinated with the kind of quotations and the kind of the wide range of texts that you talked about. I will go back to those texts and read, and then I'll talk to you about those. And then the role of speculative fiction in imagining climate change. Also, you hinted at that. And then your conclusion was somehow hinting at the pedagogical limitations and the institutional resistance, where literatures and the literature departments, they often treat eco-criticism as a secondary or optional field. Rather, it should be primary and compulsory. It should not be an elective course, but a compulsory course. There was a time when we used to ask our students to read, feminist linguistics as a compulsory course. Probably we should add courses related to ecological balance and mythology and folklore and those things as compulsory courses for every subject, so that the post-human narratives that we are talking about today will be a part of our syllabi in all the universities. Your talk was very, very important and interesting and engaging. I'm going to reread and listen to you again and again and get back to you. Thank you for your wonderful research, Professor Sanjukta. Now, maybe we can talk to Professor Pema, or maybe you want to comment something? Please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
So thank you, Nandini, for those extremely critically informed, pertinent remarks, and that I'm so happy that this talk will also act as a generating tool for your various courses, and I'm so happy that it was useful. Very honored and humbled. Thank you.
So now I invite Professor Pema.
Thank you, Professor Sahu, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Hindi University, West Bengal, and my dear colleague and friend from IGNU, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, cohorts of the Hindi University, and I hope there are some students. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today and to share some very, very mundane. After Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta's lecture, mine is a very, very mundane thing. But please keep in mind what she talked about, because this kind of takes from her, that is, it kind of takes off from what she has already talked to you about. I thought of doing something much more basic, where I'm trying to look at what exactly is comparative literature, what is world literatures, and where is this Anthropocene literature? Where is it coming from? Do we know what it is? And I've tried to look at three texts to see if there is any sort of conjunction there. So if I could just share my very, very basic slides, and I will request Professor Sanjukta to please bear with my simple, basic presentation. Now, I thought we would very quickly look at what is comparative world literatures. And the texts that I've chosen are three pretty well-known texts, which if you remember the concluding parts of Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta's lecture, talks also of oral narratives and classical literature. So I'm looking at Homer's Iliad, Vyasa's Mahabharata, and Abhigyan Shakuntalam by Kalidas. And the reason I chose these texts is one, everybody would know about it, at least almost everybody of our generation, or at least people, even 3 decades younger than us. As far as Gen Z or Generation Alpha is concerned, I am not too certain that they would even know what these things are about. Though a lot of the youngsters who read young adult fiction and fantasy fiction would be quite familiar with the Greek literature and at some level. So let me begin very, very quickly. What are we talking about when we say comparative literature? It's very basic. An engagement with two or more literary and cultural traditions, sometimes most often studied in the original languages. So I could look at, let's say, a Premchand story in Hindi and some other short story in English or in Nepali or Marathi, whatever. So we're looking at literature and culture across national borders, across various time spans, languages, genres, and across boundaries between literature and other arts as well. It can be across disciplines, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. And when we talk about world literatures, what are we talking about? The comparisons, the comparativeness, and the international dimension of comparative literature is there. It focuses on literatures and cultures from around the globe and most often in English translation. Because like Nandini said, we all have an English background. That is why I'm talking about the English translation. That's where translation studies also comes in, because all these texts should not be available only to the English reading public. And what do we actually study? We're looking at literary works. Okay, it could be in any genre. From many cultures, across many countries, we're looking at the relationship between literature and between literatures and other fields of study. We're looking at, let's say, literary analysis, whether it is of genres, of theories, or different methodologies to be followed. We're looking at cross-cultural relationships, how it helps us appreciate cross-cultural relationships, builds understanding between language and literature. And at the same time, we're also developing some skills, which are very, very important, especially for our students. One is critical thinking, analytical reasoning, and of course, communication skills. So what are some of the examples of comparative world literature? You can compare, like I said, across all genres, across all languages. It also looks at transnational research, transcultural research, cross-disciplinary works, and so on and so forth. And then, apart from these two major literary categories, which is the world literatures and comparative literature, we have another term coming in, which is a term that comes to us from atmospheric chemistry. It was coined in the 80s, became very popular about 25 years ago, and we have appropriated it in literature and psychology. Basically, it is a term that means that humans, humanity is the planetary force of change. Okay, it is no, in other words, it is also called the age of humans. Now, this is more about literature and the Anthropocene, which I really won't go into details because you could easily look at it. And what I'm really going to talk about today is examining conflict, ethics, and nature in classical texts. That's what I've tried to do. And like I told you, the text that we're going to be looking at is the Iliad, the Mahabharata, and Abhigyan Shakuntalam. Now, each of these texts are basically foundational texts in their respective civilizations. The Iliad, which is from ancient Greece around the 8th century BCE, attributed to Homer, it talks about the story of the Trojan War. And for its broad themes, you have heroism, you have faith, you have wrath or anger. The Iliad is an epic poem in 24 books. Okay, the main subject, of course, is the war with Troy. And the focus is on the Greek hero Achilles. Now, the Trojan War was this huge legendary conflict between the ancient Greeks and the people of Troy. And it dates back to the 12th to 13th century BCE. And this is something that had influenced the Greek imagination in a very, very big way. And you have it in the Iliad, you have it also in Odysseus or Odyssey, and many other early works which are now lost to posterity. It is also to be found in the literature of the Romans, which come after the Greeks, in Virgil's Aeneid. Keener Wolff translated it into Old English, and you find influences of it in Dante's Divine Comedy, which is a 14th century text, and in Milton's Paradise, a 17th century text. And if we keep tracing it, I'm sure we're going to find it in later years as well. Now, in the story, what happens in the Iliad is Paris is the prince of Troy. He runs off with Helen, who is the wife of Menelaus of Sparta. And Menelaus's brother Agamemnon leads the Greek expedition against Troy because they have to bring back their princess. The ensuing war, it goes on for 10 years. And it finally ends when the Greeks pretend to leave Troy. They've laid siege to Troy, surrounded the city. They're not allowing anything to go in and out. And finally, they pretend to leave after 10 long years, but they leave behind them a wooden horse. Now, this wooden horse has a raiding party of Greeks that are hidden inside the horse. So they, give it to the Trojans as a parting gift. And the Trojans bring the ship, the Greeks sail off, the Trojans bring the horse into their city. At night, the hidden Greeks open the gates to their comrades. They sack Troy, massacre the men, carry off the women, bringing the Trojan War to an end. On the other hand, the Mahabharata, it belongs to around about the 4th century BCE to the 4th century Common Era. It is attributed to Vyas. It is an epic again. On the one hand, we have the Greek epic. Now we have the Indian classical or the Sanskrit epic. It is an epic of war. Again, it talks about war. It talks about dharma or duty. And it talks about a whole lot of complex, very, very complex moral dilemmas. Now, the Mahabharata is one of the two ancient Sanskrit epic poems that we have. The other is the Ramayana. And the Mahabharata is often believed to be a text about dharma or the Hindu moral law and itihas. Okay? And it consists of lots of mythological and didactic material. The main story is the heroic, the the struggle between the two feuding groups of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Kauravas are the sons of Dhritarashtra, and the Pandavas, obviously, the sons of Pandu. And the poem itself is about 100,000 couplets. It is about 7 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, and divided into 18 parvanas or sections. And there is a supplement called the Harivamsha, or the genealogy of the god Hari. Now, most of us know the story of the Mahabharata. It is basically that Dhritarashtra is passed over, and because he is blind, and Pandu is favored as the king. And Pandu again has been cursed. He cannot father children. So his wife Kunti asked different gods to father children in Pandu's name. And then there is a lot of normal enmity and jealousy between these two sets of cousins. The Pandavas are forced to leave the kingdom when their father dies. During the exile, they end up jointly marrying Draupadi, who is born out of a sacrificial fire. And Arjun is the one who actually wins her in the arrow, by shooting an arrow through a row of targets. And the Pandavas eventually come back to their kingdom, but they are exiled again for 12 years. And that is when they lose, Yudhishthir loses everything in that game of dice, including Draupadi. Ultimately, it culminates in the Battle of Kurukshetra, which is supposed to be modern-day Kurukshetra in Haryana. The Kauravas are destroyed totally. Only the 5 Pandu brothers and Krishna survives. Eventually, of course, if you remember the ending of the Mahabharata, even if you haven't read the text, most of you would have watched it on television. Krishna dies when a hunter mistakes him for a deer and shoots him in his foot. And the 5 brothers, along with Draupadi and a dog, joins them on their way to heaven. One by one, all of them fall off along the way. Yudhishthira is the only one who reaches the gates of heaven. And he is again tested for his faithfulness and his consistency. And then finally, he is reunited with his brothers and Draupadi, and as well as with his cousins, the Kauravas, and they enjoy, perpetual bliss in heaven, so to speak. Now, this central plot itself, it is only about 1/5 of the total volume of the work. The rest of it is you have different types of myths, the oral tradition, you have legends, you have the romance of Damayanti and her husband Nala, you have the legend of Savitri, all kinds of stories that are in the Mahabharata. But essentially, the Mahabharata is a text of war. It is a text that talks about dharma, or the code, dharma not as in religion. It talks about the code of conduct, including the proper code of conduct of a king, of a warrior, of an individual, and of a person who is also seeking freedom from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, moksha. And the poem, the entire epic, it keeps on, showing you at different points the conflicts that arise, the code between the code of dharma and the situations that come up. And the hero, the protagonist, cannot help but sometimes violate them in some respect or the other, no matter what choice he is making. Now, the third text that we're looking at is Abhigyan Shakuntalam, which is a play by Kalidas, which explores love, destiny, and nature's connection with human emotions. It is considered to be one of the greatest Indian literary works of any period. These are just some snapshots from Homer's Iliad, Helen of Troy. This is from the Mahabharata. Okay. Now, the story of Shakuntala also comes from legends, comes from the Mahabharata, which talks about the origin of the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And basically, it is the story of how Shakuntala meets the Shant in the forest, marries him through a Gandharva marriage, has a baby. He rejects the Shakuntala as well as the baby. And ultimately, everything works out and they are reunited in heaven. Now, the child that is born of the Shant and the Shakuntala is Bharat, who's supposed to be the ancestor of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, as well as, Bharatvarsha, the subcontinent of Bharat. And this particular play, the way Kalidas remodels the story of Shakuntala, he turns it into a love idyll where the characters, okay, they have this very, very aristocratic ideals. There is Shakuntala, who is sentimental, who is selfless. She is alive to the delicacies of nature. And you have the king, whose first guiding principle is his dharma, the religious, social, moral laws and duties. And the king, who is the protector of the social order, he is the hero, and yet he is tender and suffering agony over his lost love. Where you, if you read again Shakuntala, the loom of time, you will realize that once he knows that it is, I mean, he recognizes Shakuntala eventually, and he knows that he has committed a big, a crime or a sin against her by denouncing her. So he is agonizing over that. And the interesting thing about Shakuntala is when you read the play, Dushyant is not supposed to be responsible for their separation. He is under the delusion which was caused by the Durvasha Rishi's curse. And of course, Shakuntala is full of descriptions of nature. Shakuntala is compared to lots of things in nature. Now, the themes that I was looking at and trying to do a comparative analysis was war and conflict versus love and destiny. That's one of the themes. So you have the Iliad and the Mahabharata, which are war-centric. And they depict massive conflicts, both the Trojan War and the Kurukshetra War. Now, these two major conflicts, they were driven by fate, revenge, to a large extent, divine intervention, whereas Abhigyana Shakuntalam focuses on love and on something that's entirely different and softer, on separation, on reunion, and it becomes a foil to the violence of the earlier two epics. Now, when you talk about war, right? When you talk about war, especially in the case of the Greek wars, there was a lot of destruction. If you read the Iliad, most of the students around the country who have been following the CBCS syllabus would realize that Iliad is the first text that you read in the classical European literature section. Here you have, in the Iliad, you will have long descriptions of the horrors of war. Okay, for example, you talk about Hector and Achilles, the fight between them, the killing, that goes on in the war. And then you also had in the Iliad, you also had all these natural disasters. You had Zeus and his thunderbolts being struck here and there. There is flood, there is wildfire, all kinds of things where even nature seems to be kind of intervening in some context. And at one level, you can look at it as Homeric heroes, they have to have nature on their side if they are to overcome the enemy. So there is a one particular scene where, Hector is compared to a wave that's smashing into a floundering ship. And in another section later on, he is compared to a lion that is pouncing on cattle. Now, Hector's revenge, okay, is complete when he is viewed as this instrument of nature that is contrasting, human mortality with the boundlessness of the natural world. You have this very, very famous painting of Achilles dragging Hector's lifeless body in Troy. So when on the one hand, you had the wave pounding on a ship, the image of that. In another, you had the image of a lion pouncing on cattle. So there is this dual image coming across, which is combining the inanimate, the wave, and the animate, the lion, together. And this kind of seems to connote the revenge of the warriors and the revenge of nature. And revenge, as you know, is a recurring motive in the Iliad. But, Hector's revenge on the Greek invaders is largely compromised because it has already been willed that he will be killed and Troy will be overrun by the Greeks. And Achilles, on the other hand, you realize through much of the Iliad, he is angry, he is upset, he's refusing to fight. Why? Because first, the slave girl he had that was given to him, Brisea, she is confiscated. Then, he refuses to fight because of that. Finally, he's cajoled and brought back to fight. And he only comes back to fight. Why? Because Hector has killed his friend Patroclus. And of course, once the Achilles is so wound up by the death of Patroclus, that he carries on a massacre, a massive scale massacre, and it moves into the river Scamander, which then is filled with corpses. Now, the river Scamander is also a god, and he does not like the violation of the waters. But Achilles, he continues because he is in a frenzy, a killing frenzy. And what is happening is, at one level, we can look at Achilles showcasing the impact of the war on the environment. Okay, because he's dragged the war into the river. And while the mortal enemy cannot stop Achilles because he's such an accomplished warrior, the river Scamander, it swamps him. And he is ultimately bailed out of the waters by allied gods. He is almost drowned by the angry river. And then you have the next scene where he is walking, literally trudging through fields after he has been rescued by the gods from the river. He's trudging through fields which is completely scattered with corpses, discarded armor. And then we realize that the forces of nature are not inviolable and they should remain unviolated. So basically, these are just looking at how nature can be explained, or the wrath of nature, or however you want to look at it, can be explained through various texts, the conflict with nature. Now, the Mahabharata, on the other hand, of course, has lots of references to forests, to trees, to cosmic order, and it reflects a lot of ecological and spiritual interconnectedness. The difference that Professor Sanjukta Gupta was talking about, the Western tradition and the Eastern tradition, so to speak. And if we remember, nature or environment is never really considered to be a very hostile element in ancient Indian texts. And through many of the older texts, you will realize humans are actually forbidden from exploiting nature. They are instead taught to live with nature and recognize the divinity that prevails in all elements of nature, including the flora and the fauna. The Bhagavad Gita, there are many instances in the Bhagavad Gita where you were advised not to try to change nature, not to be not to try to what you call wrestle with it, even if it seems hostile at times, to tolerate it. So if you look at it from the ecological point of view, the Mahabharata is a story also of how dharma came to be established as a result of a conflict over social policies in response to an ongoing environmental or an ecological crisis. Now, through all of this, we have to remember that climate action, climate change is also one of the SDGs that the UN and the entire world is trying to achieve. And the Mahabharata, of course, you have lots of vivid descriptions of nature, clear blue skies, clean rivers, pure breeze, And I'm not going to go into all of that because I think we're going to make Nandini very, very late. You have descriptions of various types of fruits and leaves, how the mango leaves are, used during pujas and auspicious events. So you have all of this in a text like the Mahabharata. And Abhiyan Shakuntala, on the other hand, has the strongest nature imagery, whether we're talking about the forest, because if you remember, it begins in the forest. The play begins in the forest. Whether you're talking about the seasons that symbolize human emotions, divine harmony, whether you're talking about when Shakuntala is leaving the hermitage to go to Hastinapur, to go to the Shan's court, nature seems to be weeping along with her. Now, the next thing that this is a picture of how Achilles, he has killed Hector and he's dragging Hector's lifeless body in Troy across the battlefield. So, like I said, these texts, okay, the Mahabharata and the Iliad, they talk about heroism. The Iliad portrays heroism through the character of Achilles, who is torn between glory, he wants that glory, and at the same time, he wants a peaceful life. The Mahabharata has multiple heroes. The Pandavas. You have Karna amongst the Kauravas. You have Bhishma. All of them struggling with various ethical dilemmas, which are not really related to the act of war itself. And Abhiyan Shakuntalam, it shifts from war. It is an emotional journey. It is looking at something else. It's looking at inner strength rather than heroism in the battlefield. Then you have this the role of women in these three plays, in these three texts. Now, Helen of Troy was supposed in the Iliad. I mean, it's because of her that the whole war takes place and the whole Iliad came to be written. She was considered to be a great beauty. In fact, it's, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? Is a quote about Helen. But she is a very passive figure in the entire epic. She causes the war, but then she lacks any other sort of agency. There is nothing else that she does, except for a conversation she has with Hector, where she tells Hector that you are the one who actually stands to lose a lot, because it was Hector's brother who abducted Helen. Or you have Draupadi in the Mahabharata. Now, Draupadi has a very important role to play. She's extremely strong willed. She questions morality. She questions the sense of justice. When Draupadi, if you recall, is being dragged into the assembly hall, Yudhishthir has lost everything in that game of dice, and he now bets Draupadi on it. And of course, inevitably, he loses the game. So Draupadi is now supposed to be handed over to the Kauravas. And when Draupadi is being dragged into the assembly hall, there is a very, very vivid description of her. She is actually menstruating at that time, so she just has one, cloth wrapped around her. And she is to be disrobed in that assembly hall, which is filled with only men. And she has some questions which she asks the elders. Her one main question is Yudhishthir had lost everything, including his brothers and himself. So he is already enslaved, right, to the Kauravas. So then, can a slave own anything else? Why? Because he staked Draupadi as, because he felt that he owned her. So this question is something that nobody is able to answer. So Draupadi is a very strong-willed woman, and she has a role to play in the Mahabharata, which Helen of Troy does not, apart from just causing the war. And Shakuntala, on the other hand, she embodies grace, endurance. She represents a different form of mental strength. In fact, if you look at Shakuntala in the play, began Shakuntalam by um, Kalidas and you look at the Shakuntala story in the Mahabharata, you realize that, in the Mahabharata itself, Shakuntala's only claim to fame is that she's the mother of Bharat, nothing else. But in Kalidas's play, Abhijnana Shakuntalam, the recognition of um, Shakuntala, she is the protagonist. The storyline develops and revolves around her. She has a much more important role to play here in the play than in the Mahabharata. And this is a 19th century oil painting which shows Achilles, he's fighting in the river, right? He's taken the battle into the river. And here you have the god, river god Scamander, which is who is extremely annoyed by the pollution of the water. Now, the Iliad sees nature as a kind of backdrop for the war. It doesn't really it doesn't really have an ecological emphasis. The interpretation that I talked about earlier is what we are trying to establish. The Mahabharata, on the other hand, it references forests, rivers, like I said, a whole lot of things. And Abhijnana Shakuntalam, of course, has the strongest imagery of nature and seasons. Now, the cultural significance and influence of these texts, like I said earlier, the Iliad influenced Western epics to a very great extent. Okay, it has also influenced Virgil's Aeneid, Beowulf, a lot of war literature. The Mahabharata, it shapes Indian thought, inspires later literature, art, and philosophy. And Abhijnana Shakuntalam has this very unique position between both the texts because it influenced Indian as well as Western drama. And you had Goethe praising its poetic beauty. So what we tried to do today was, look at the Iliad and the Mahabharata as depicting the tragedies of war and human fate. And Abhijnana Shakuntalam is offering a contrast because it focuses on love, nature, redemption. And if you take these three texts together, they seem to highlight different facets of human experience: the conflict, the duty, destiny, emotional depth. And that is how it connects to comparative world literatures. And thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a fascinating explanation and description. Over to VC Madam for presidential remark on this talk.
Thank you, Priyanka. And yes, thank you, Professor Pema. Your talk was rather very, very fascinating, and it was truly interdisciplinary. You compared the three texts with their layers, their complexity, lot of theorization as expected from you, and you highlighted the different facets of the humanity through the three texts. But what I liked the best about your lecture was you defined comparative literature. What is comparative literature, and then what is world literature, and then how we unite these two things and then present those on the university table to the students. Your lecture was very, very student oriented. Definitely, it has to be that committed teacher that you are. And yes, you talked about literature across boundaries and literature across genres, and then literature can create the skills for critical thinking. Literature as transnational and transcultural research, and then something that is interesting, the students may please take note of this: dharma as a code of conduct and not as religion. They confuse dharma with religion, but you made it very, very clear through your lecture that dharma is code of conduct and it's not religion, if you look at these three seminal texts. And very interesting and fascinating stuff about Draupadi cult. You have done serious research before delivering this lecture. I'm so glad, and I do appreciate you for this. And moksha as not enlightenment but as redemption. Yes. And then you hinted at ecological and spiritual connectedness through your lecture. And then you have very interesting slides. Kindly share the slides with us. We will share those with our students. And Professor Pema, from your lecture, I took down these points, and then what is my takeaway that I understood and that I'm going to use as a part of the blocks and units when we design our syllabus for comparative world literature. I have written 6 to 7 very critical points, but I will talk about only two. Rest others I will share with you. And once you authenticate those, then I will use them as a part of the syllabus. The first one is epic as ideology. I thought you are narrating epic as ideology, like Homeric versus Vyasadeva's narrative structures, like Marxist and structuralist critiques would do it. The example was Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. They project heroism as an individualistic pursuit, aligning with Western capitalist values like Marxist reading. In contrast, Vyasadeva's Mahabharata embeds dharma with collective duty, prioritizing kinship over individual glory. So I understood that from what you talked about epic as ideology. And then there are many other things that I have written, but the last one I will tell you. Just let us know if you agree with this. Uh, you have taken a post-colonial turn here. Homer and Kalidas as instruments of cultural hegemony. That's what I took from your lecture, though you haven't mentioned it directly, but I took it from your lecture. Eurocentric literary historiography privileges Homer as the origin of universal literature while sidelining non-European epics. Kalidas reclaimed through Orientalism, like William Jones would say, it's still read through a Western lens, often from Sanskritic and caste-driven dimensions. But in the post-colonial theory, like Edward Said or Spivak would agree, post-colonial theory demands rethinking world literature beyond Eurocentric genealogies, challenging why Homeric epics dominate global curricula while Kalidas remains very, very specialized. In English departments, very few English departments do teach Kalidas. Yeah, IGNOR does, Delhi University does, some of them do. But Kalidas's texts, original texts, are somehow specialized in Sanskrit departments or some language departments in our country, whereas Homer dominates the global curricula. So you tried to problematize that, and also you were giving a lot of solutions to that through your truly interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary approach to the text. I deeply appreciate your research, and thank you very much for giving this kind of a well-researched presentation to our students and faculty. We are certainly going to get back to you while we design our syllabus. Thanks a lot. And now maybe Professor Pema would like to comment, after which Priyanka may make it open for a couple of questions. By 12, we have to
Thank you,
complete this
Nandini,
session.
for making my talk sound so erudite.
Okay, maybe you can comment.
Hello. Ma'am, actually, I got disconnected. So can I just leave and join again? I can't hear anything. Actually,
Okay.
hello.
No, but we can hear you. We can hear you. We can see you as well, Priyanka.
Ma'am, just give me 5 minutes. I'm just reconnecting.
So, Professor Pema, do you agree with the points that I raised towards the end of my presidential remarks, or what, Priyanka? Termed it as presidential remarks.
Presidential remarks.
Giving presidential remarks to Professor Pema, with whom I am growing up.
Please stop calling me Professor Pema. You always call me Pema. Let's stick to that.
Okay, let's stick to that.
Yes, I do agree. And like you said, I think the whole process of institutionalization of English studies in India has been problematic, and all of us are guilty of actually perpetuating it to a large extent as well. But thankfully, with the choice-based credit system, when they introduced a full course on classical Indian literature, so our students were then able to, because see, what happens is you have a paper on Indian English writing. So you're reading, and some universities do more contemporary. Some universities go back to the three great vanguards of Indian writing in English. So they leave out this whole chunk of ancient literature, which is very, very rich, even if we're reading it in English. Right? It's a very rich body of literature and something that's part of our cultural imagination and our cultural memory. It's part of our cultural heritage. Even if we don't, quote from it and know it so well, we should be aware of the richness that is there. And it only enriches, it makes our own understanding of the world, our own understanding of different literatures clearer. It gives us a point to discuss other, issues, look at things in a different way. So the one thing CBCS did that was good was introduce classical Indian literature. And at the same time, I'm not going to negate the Western canon. It also introduced classical European literature because, again, many universities across the country do not really talk about classical Western literature. Most universities I know don't teach the ancient Greek literature in translation at all. Some of us, I'm from West Bengal, so we were very lucky with North Bengal University. We had Greek literature. Later on, the interesting thing is after our principal, she retired because she knew Greek. Our college stopped teaching Greek literature. It shifted to American literature because everybody can, teach it. So a lot of things are even actually lost during the entire curriculum design stage. So you have that opportunity to look at what you want to include, how you can make your departments, different departments richer. So I think you're lucky you can do that.
So yes, I know. Being the founder vice chancellor, I am lucky. We
Yeah.
can do a lot of experimentation. Then that's when we will invite you to advise us, to give us very good text. So Priyanka,
you.
have you joined? Priyanka,
Yeah,
any
she's
questions?
online.
Ma'am,
She's
yes.
online.
If there are no questions, then maybe you can thank the speakers, or if there are questions, please take one or two.
Uh, is there any question? Any comment? Hello.
So,
Uh,
Pema, I can see that as panelists, few people have joined. 12 people as panelists and 200 people as participants. They have joined and they're listening to you. But they have no questions probably, so Priyanka can go and propose the vote of thanks.
Priyanka, make it a quick vote of thanks so your VC can lead.
On behalf of the Hindi University, I would like to extend my thanks to both the speakers for their vibrant and thought-provoking lecture. Most importantly, I'd like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, ma'am, for organizing such a wide range lectures which enrich us to a great extent. And I'd also like to thank our finance officers, sir, controller, sir, and registrar, sir, and to all the participants who have joined. And in fact, the administrative sector has extended their support and help. Special thanks should be given to Raj ji, who have managed to create the Zoom link and supported the webinar with all the technical helps. And last but not the least, I'd like to thank all the students and faculty members who have joined. Thank you all.